Vermont is a state in the New England region of the northeastern United States. It borders the U.S. states of Massachusetts to the south, New Hampshire to the east and New York to the west, and the Canadian province of Quebec to the north. Lake Champlain forms half of Vermont's western border with New York. The Green Mountains run north-south for the length of the state. Vermont is the second smallest by population and the sixth smallest by area of the 50 U.S. states. The state capital is Montpelier, the least populous state capital in the United States. The most populous city, Burlington, is the least populous city to be the most populous city in a state. As of 2015, Vermont was the leading producer of maple syrup in the United States. It was ranked as the safest state in the country in 2016. For thousands of years, indigenous peoples, including the Mohawk and the Algonquian-speaking Abenaki, occupied much of the territory that is now Vermont and was later claimed by France's colony of New France. France ceded the territory to Great Britain after being defeated in 1763 in the 7 Years' War. For many years, the nearby colonies, especially the provinces of New Hampshire and New York, disputed control of the area, then called the New Hampshire Grants. Settlers who held land titles granted by New York were opposed by the Green Mountain Boys militia, which supported the many settlers whose claims were based on grants from New Hampshire. Ultimately, those settlers prevailed in creating an independent state, the Vermont Republic. Founded in 1777 during the American Revolutionary War, the Republic lasted for 14 years. Aside from the original 13 states that were formerly colonies, Vermont is one of only 4 U.S. states that were previously sovereign states, along with California, Hawaii, and Texas. Vermont was also the first state to join the U.S. as its 14th member state after the original 13. While still an independent republic, Vermont was the first of any future U.S. state to partially abolish slavery. Vermont is located in the New England region of the northeastern United States and comprises 9,614 square miles, 24,900 square kilometers, making it the 45th largest state. It is the only state that does not have any buildings taller than 124 feet, 38 m. Land comprises 9,250 square miles, 24,000 square kilometers, and water comprises 365 square miles, 950 square kilometers, making it the 43rd largest in land area and the 47th in water area. In total area, it is larger than El Salvador and smaller than Haiti. It is the only landlocked state in New England. The west bank of the Connecticut River marks the state's eastern border with New Hampshire, though much of the river is within New Hampshire's territory. 41% of Vermont's land area is part of the Connecticut River's watershed. Lake Champlain, the sixth largest body of fresh water in the United States, separates Vermont from New York in the northwest portion of the state. From north to south, Vermont is 159 miles, 256 kilometers, long. Its greatest width, from east to west, is 89 miles, 143 kilometers, at the Canada-U.S. border. The narrowest width is 37 miles, 60 kilometers, at the Massachusetts line. The width averages 60.5 miles, 97.4 kilometers. The state's geographic center is approximately 3 miles, 5 kilometers, east of Roxbury, in Washington County. There are 15 U.S. federal border crossings between Vermont and Canada. The origin of the name Vermont is uncertain, but likely comes from the French les verts monts, meaning the Green Mountains. Thomas Young introduced it in 1777. Some authorities say that the mountains were called green because they were more forested than the higher White Mountains of New Hampshire and Adirondacks of New York. Others say that the predominance of mica quartz chlorite schist, a green-hued metamorphosed shale, is the reason. The Green Mountain Range forms a north-south spine running most of the length of the state, slightly west of its center. In the southwest portion of the state are the Taconic Mountains, the Granitic Mountains are in the northeast. In the northwest, near Lake Champlain, is the fertile Champlain Valley. In the south of the valley is Lake Beaumassine. Several mountains have timberlines with delicate year-round alpine ecosystems, including Mount Mansfield, the highest mountain in the state, Killington Peak, the second highest, Camel's Hump, the state's third highest, and Mount Abraham, the fifth highest peak. Areas in Vermont administered by the National Park Service include the Marsh-Billings-Rockefeller National Historical Park, in Woodstock, and the Appalachian National Scenic Trail. Cities. Vermont has 9 incorporated cities. The most populous city in Vermont is Burlington, and its metropolitan area is also the most populous in the state with an estimate of 214,796 as of 2013. Largest towns. Although these towns are large enough to be considered cities, they are not incorporated as such. Climate. The annual mean temperature for the state is 43 degrees Fahrenheit, 6 degrees Celsius. Vermont has a humid continental climate, with muddy springs, in general a mild early summer, hot Augusts. It has colorful autumns. Vermont's hills reveal red, orange, and, on sugar maples, gold foliage as cold weather approaches. Winters are colder at higher elevations. It has a Köppen climate classification of DFB, similar to Minsk, Stockholm, and Fargo. The rural northeastern section known as the Northeast Kingdom often averages 10 degrees Fahrenheit, 5.6 degrees Celsius, colder than the southern areas of the state during winter. The annual snowfall averages between 60 and 100 inches, 1,500 and 2,500 millimeters, depending on elevation. Vermont is the 7th coldest state in the country. In winter, until typical El Niño conditions, Vermont's winters are too cold to snow, the air is too cold to contain sufficient moisture to prompt precipitation. The highest recorded temperature was 105 degrees Fahrenheit, 41 degrees Celsius, at Vernon, on July 4, 1911. The lowest recorded temperature was 50 degrees F, 46 degrees C, at Bloomfield, on December 30, 1933. This is the lowest temperature recorded in New England. Big Black River, Maine, also recorded a verified 50 degrees F, 46 degrees C, in 2009. The agricultural growing season ranges from 120 to 180 days. The USDA plant hardiness zones for the state range between Zone 3B, no colder than 35 degrees F, 37 degrees C, in the Northeast Kingdom and northern part of the state, and Zone 5B, no colder than 15 degrees F, 26 degrees C, in the southern part of the state. The state receives between 2,000 and 2,400 hours of sunshine annually. Geology. There are 5 distinct physiographic regions of Vermont. Categorized by geological and physical attributes, they are the Northeastern Highlands, the Green Mountains, the Taconic Mountains, the Champlain Lowlands, and the Vermont Piedmont. About 500 million years ago, Vermont was part of Laurentia and located in the tropics. The central and southern Green Mountain Range include the oldest rocks in Vermont, formed about 1 billion years ago during the first mountain building period, or orogeny. Subsequently, about 400 million years ago, the second mountain building period created green mountain peaks that were 15,000–20,000 feet, 4,606,100 m, tall, 3 to 4 times their current height and comparable to the Himalayas. The geological pressures that created those peaks remain evident as the Champlain thrust, running north-south to the west of the mountains, now the eastern shore of Lake Champlain. It is an example of geological fault thrusting where bedrock is pushed over the newer rock formation. As a result of tectonic formation, Vermont east of the Green Mountains tends to be formed from rocks produced in the Silurian and Devonian periods. Western Vermont mainly from the older Precambrian and Cambrian material. Several large deposits within the state contain granite. The remains of the Chazy Formation can be observed in Isle La Motte. It was one of the first tropical reefs. It is the site of the limestone Fisk Quarry, which contains a collection of ancient marine fossils such as stromatoporoids that date back to 200 million years ago. It is believed that at one point, Vermont was connected to Africa, Pangaea, and the fossils found in the rock formations found on the coasts in both Africa and America are further evidence of the Pangaea theory. In the past 4 centuries, Vermont has experienced a few earthquakes rarely centered under Vermont, the highest being a Richter magnitude scale 6.0 in 1952. Fauna. The state contains 41 species of reptiles and amphibians, 89 species of fish, of which 12 are non-native, 193 species of breeding birds, 58 species of mammals, more than 15,000 insect species, and 2,000 higher plant species, plus fungi, algae, and 75 different types of natural communities. Vermont contains 1 species of venomous snake, the timber rattlesnake, which is confined to a few acres in western Rutland County. By the mid-19th century, wild turkeys were exterminated in the state through overhunting and destruction of habitat. 16 were reintroduced in 1969 and had grown to an estimated flock of 45,000 in 2009. In 2013, hunters killed 6,968 of these. Since 1970, reduction of farmland has resulted in reduced environment for, and reduced numbers of various shrubland birds including the American woodcock, brown thrasher, eastern towhee, willow flycatcher, golden-winged warbler, blue-winged warbler, field sparrow, and Baltimore oriole. DDT destroyed the eggshells of ospreys, which resulted in their disappearance from the state. This species began reviving in 1998. As of 2010, they were no longer endangered in the state. White nose syndrome killed an estimated 2/3 of all cave wintering bats in the state from 2008 to 2010. The New England Cottontail disappeared from the state in the early 1970s, outcompeted by the eastern cottontail rabbit, imported in the 1800s for hunting, and which is better able to detect predators. Out of a total of 33 species of bumblebee, there were 19 or 20 in the state in 2013. Bombus terricola, the yellow-banded bumblebee, although once common in Vermont, has not been seen in most of its range since 1999 and is now absent from Vermont. For honeybees, colony collapse disorder has affected bee population in the state, as elsewhere. Invasive species included the Asian spotted-winged Drosophila, which started damaging berry crops in 2012. Vermont was the initial point of invasion in New England. Since 2010, the Vermont Department of Health has worked with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to conduct blood serum surveys of the state's deer and moose populations. Tests for Eastern equine encephalitis virus antibodies were positive in moose or deer in each of Vermont's counties. In 2012, 12% of deer and 2.4% of moose tested positive. Flora. Vermont is in the temperate broadleaf and mixed forests biome. Much of the state, in particular the Green Mountains, is covered by the conifers and northern hardwoods of the New England Acadian forests. The western border with New York and the area around Lake Champlain lies within the eastern Great Lakes lowland forests. The southwest corner of the state and parts of the Connecticut River are covered by northeastern coastal forests of mixed oak. Invasive wild honeysuckle has been deemed a threat to the state's forests, native species of plants, and wildlife. Many of Vermont's rivers, including the Winooski River, have been subjected to man-made barriers to prevent flooding. Climate change appears to be affecting the maple sugar industry. Sugar maples have been subject to stress by acid rain, Asian longhorn beetles, pear thrips, and, in 2011, an excessive deer herd that is forced to eat bark in the winter. These maples need a certain amount of cold to produce sap for maple syrup. The time to tap these trees has shrunk to 1 week in some years. The tree may be replaced by the more aggressive Norway maples, in effect forcing the sugar maples to migrate north to Canada. History. Native American occupancy. Between 8,500 and 7,000 BCE, at the time of the Champlain Sea, Native Americans inhabited and hunted in present-day Vermont. During the Archaic period, from the 8th millennium BCE to 1000 BCE, Native Americans migrated year-round. During the Woodland period, from 1000 BCE to 1600 CE, villages and trade networks were established, and ceramic and bow and arrow technology was developed. During colonial times, the state was mainly occupied by an Abenaki tribe known as the Sokoke, or Mississaugas. However, the eastern part of the state may have also been home to the Androscoggin and Pennacook peoples. Also, Vermont's western border is only a rough approximation of their borders with the Iroquoian Mohawk and the Algonquin Mohican peoples. Many of the tribes later formed the Wabanaki Confederacy during King Philip's War, after which most Abenaki tribes were scattered and defeated. The population in 1500 CE was estimated to be around 10,000 people. Colonial. The first European to see Vermont is thought to have been Jacques Cartier in 1535. On July 30, 1609, French explorer Samuel de Champlain claimed Vermont as part of New France. In 1666, French settlers erected Fort St. Anne on Isle La Motte, the first European settlement in Vermont. The violent 1638 New Hampshire earthquake was felt throughout New England, centered in the St. Lawrence Valley. This was the first seismic event noted in Vermont. In 1690, a group of Dutch-British settlers from Albany established a settlement and trading post at Chimney Point 8 miles, 13 kilometers, west of present-day Addison. During Dummer's War, the first permanent British settlement was established in 1724 with the construction of Fort Dummer. It was to protect the nearby settlements of Dummerston and Brattleboro. From 1731 to 1734, the French constructed Fort St. Frederick, which gave them control of the New France-Vermont frontier region in the Lake Champlain Valley. With the outbreak of the French and Indian War in 1754, the North American front of the 7 Years' War between the French and British, the French began construction of Fort Carillon at present-day Ticonderoga, New York in 1755. The British failed to take Fort St. Frederick or Fort Carillon between 1755 and 1758. In 1759 a combined force of 12,000 British regular and provincial troops under Sir Geoffrey Amherst captured Carillon, after which the French abandoned Fort St. Frederick. Amherst constructed Fort Crown Point next to the remains of the Fort St. Frederick, securing British control over the area. Following France's loss in the French and Indian War, through the 1763 Treaty of Paris they ceded control of the land to the British. Colonial settlement was limited by the Crown to lands east of the Appalachians, in order to try to end encroachment on Native American lands. The territory of Vermont was divided nearly in half in a jagged line running from Fort William Henry in Lake George diagonally northeastward to Lake Memphremagog. With the end of the war, new settlers arrived in Vermont. Ultimately, Massachusetts, New Hampshire and New York all claimed this frontier area. On July 20, 1764, King George III established the boundary between New Hampshire and New York along the west bank of the Connecticut River, north of Massachusetts, and south of 45 degrees north latitude. New York refused to recognize the land titles known as the New Hampshire Grants, towns created by land grants sold by New Hampshire Governor Benning Wentworth, and dissatisfied New Hampshire settlers organized in opposition. In 1770 Ethan Allen, his brothers Ira and Levi, and the Allens' cousins Seth Warner and Remember Baker, recruited an informal militia known as the Green Mountain Boys to protect the interests of the original New Hampshire settlers against newcomers from New York. In 1775, after the outbreak of the American Revolutionary War, the Green Mountain Boys assisted a force from Connecticut, led by Benedict Arnold, in capturing the British fort at Ticonderoga. Thereafter, the Continental Congress in Philadelphia directed the New York Colony's Revolutionary Congress to fund and equip Allen's militia as a ranger regiment of the Continental Army, which it did. Seth Warner was chosen by the men of the regiment to lead, while Ethan Allen went on to serve as a colonel in Schuyler's Army of Northern New York. Sovereignty. On January 15, 1777, representatives of the New Hampshire Grants declared the independence of Vermont. For the first 6 months of its existence, it was called the Republic of New Connecticut. On June 2, 1777, a second convention of 72 delegates met and adopted the name Vermont. This was on the advice of a friendly Pennsylvanian, Dr. Thomas Young, friend and mentor of Ethan Allen, who wrote to them on how to achieve admission into the newly independent United States of America as the 14th state. On July 4, they completed the drafting of the Constitution of Vermont at the Windsor Tavern, and adopted it on July 8. This was the first written constitution in North America to ban adult slavery, saying male slaves become free at the age of 21 and females at 18. It provided for universal adult male suffrage and required support of public schools. It was in effect from 1777 to 1786. The revised Constitution of 1786, which established a greater separation of powers, continued in effect until 1793, 2 years after Vermont's admission to the Union. Slavery was fully banned by state law on November 25, 1858, less than 3 years before the American Civil War. Vermont played an important geographical role in the Underground Railroad, which helped American slaves escape to Canada. Revolutionary War. The Battle of Bennington, fought on August 16, 1777, was a seminal event in the history of the state of Vermont and the United States. A combined American force, under General John Stark's command, attacked the Hessian column at Hoosick, New York, just across the border from Bennington. It killed or captured virtually the entire Hessian detachment. General Burgoyne never recovered from this loss and eventually surrendered the remainder of his 6,000-man force at Saratoga, New York, on October 17 that year. The battles of Bennington and Saratoga together are recognized as the turning point in the Revolutionary War because they were the first major defeat of a British army. The anniversary of the battle is still celebrated in Vermont as a legal holiday. The Battle of Hubbardston, July 7, 1777, was the only Revolutionary battle within the present boundaries of Vermont. Although the Continental forces were technically defeated, the British forces were damaged to the point that they did not pursue the Americans, retreating from Fort Ticonderoga, any further. Admission to the Union. Vermont continued to govern itself as a sovereign entity based in the eastern town of Windsor for 14 years. The independent state of Vermont issued its own coinage from 1785 to 1788 and operated a statewide postal service. Thomas Chittenden was the governor in 1778–89 and in 1790–91. Because the state of New York continued to assert a disputed claim that Vermont was a part of New York, Vermont could not be admitted to the Union under Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution until the legislature of New York consented. On March 6, 1790, the legislature made its consent contingent upon a negotiated agreement on the precise boundary between the two states. When commissioners from New York and Vermont met to decide on the boundary, Vermont's negotiators insisted on also settling the property ownership disputes with New Yorkers, rather than leaving that to be decided later in a federal court. The negotiations were successfully concluded in October 1790 with an agreement that Vermont would pay $30,000 to New York to be distributed among New Yorkers who claimed land in Vermont under New York land patents. In January 1791, a convention in Vermont voted 1054 to petition Congress to become a state in the federal union. Congress acted on February 18, 1791 to admit Vermont to the Union as the 14th state as of March 4, 1791. Vermont became the first to enter the Union after the original 13 states. The Civil War. From the mid-1850s on, some Vermonters became activists opposing slavery, which they had previously worked to contain in the South. Abolitionist Thaddeus Stevens was born in Vermont and later represented a district in Pennsylvania in Congress. He developed as a national leader and later promoted radical Republican goals after the American Civil War. While the Whig Party shriveled, and the Republican Party emerged, Vermont supported Republican candidates. In 1860 it voted for Abraham Lincoln for U.S. President, giving him the largest margin of victory of any state. During the American Civil War, Vermont sent 33,288 men into United States service. 5,224 Vermonters, over 15%, were killed or mortally wounded in action or died of disease. The northernmost land/battle action of the war, the St Albans Raid, took place in Vermont. However, the raiders were forced to return the possessions after the Canadians captured them at their border. Postbellum era to present. Demographic changes. Beginning in the mid-19th century, Vermont attracted numerous Irish, Scots-Irish and Italian immigrants, adding to its residents of mostly English and French-Canadian ancestry. Many migrated to Barre, where the men worked as stonecutters of granite, for which there was a national market. Vermont granite was used in major public buildings in many states. Many Italian and Scottish women operated boarding houses in the late 19th century to support their families. Such facilities helped absorb new residents, who peaked between 1890 and 1900. Typically immigrants boarded with people of their own language and ethnicity, but sometimes they boarded with others. Natural disasters. The state has suffered some natural disasters in the 20th and 21st centuries related to hurricanes, extensive rain, and flooding. Large-scale flooding occurred in early November 1927. During this incident, 84 people died, including the state's lieutenant governor. The 1938 New England hurricane in the fall of that year blew down 15 million acres, 61,000 square kilometers, of trees, one-third of the total forest at the time in New England. 3 billion board feet were salvaged. Today many of the older trees in Vermont are about 75 years old, dating from after this storm. Another flood occurred in 1973, causing the deaths of 2 people and millions of dollars in property damage. The state suffered severe flooding in late August 2011 caused by Tropical Storm Irene. Heavy rains caused flooding in many towns built in narrow river valleys. The governor described it as one of the worst natural disasters of the 20th and 21st centuries, second only to the flood of 1927. Political changes. Vermont approved women's suffrage decades before it became part of the national constitution. Women were first allowed to vote in the elections of December 18, 1880, when women were granted limited suffrage. They were first allowed to vote in town elections, and later in state legislative races. In 1964, the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Reynolds v. Sims required one man, one vote redistricting in all states. This resulted in major changes in Vermont. This ruling required city residents to be given an equitable share of apportionment in both houses in every state. Vermont had long been dominated by rural districts, as were several southern states in those years. Until that time, apportionment was based on county jurisdictions, which had given more power to rural counties and decreased representation of urban residents. This arrangement had meant that urban issues were not considered in proportion to the number of people affected by them. In July 2000, Vermont became the first state to introduce civil unions. In 2009, Vermont became the first state to legislate same-sex marriage unforced by court challenge or ruling. Demographics. Population changes. According to the United States Census Bureau, as of April 15, 2015, Vermont has an estimated population of 626,042, which was an increase of 297 since April 15, 2010. This includes a natural increase 3,178, 31,716 births minus 28,538 deaths, and a decrease due to net migration of 2,432 people out of the state. In 2006 it had the second lowest birth rate in the nation, 42/1,000 women. The center of population of Vermont is located in Washington County, in the town of Warren. As of 2014, 51.3% of Vermont's population was born in the state, compared with 58.7% for the United States. The changing demographics between those with multi-generational ties to the state and those who are newcomers, bringing different values with them, has resulted in a degree of tension between the two perspectives. This tension is expressed in the terms, woodchuck, being applied to those established in the state, and flatlander, applied to the newcomers. Vermont is the least populous New England state. As of 2012, Vermont was one of only 2 states in the U.S. with fewer people than the District of Columbia. The other was Wyoming. From 2010 to 2013, 16 out of Vermont's 251 towns experienced an increase in population. All towns in Chittenden increased with the exception of Burlington. More than 180 towns experienced a decrease, which hadn't happened since the mid-19th century. Population characteristics. 94.3% of the population identified as white, not of Hispanic or Latino origin in a 2013 U.S. Census estimate. As of the 2010 census, Vermont was the second whitest state in the Union after Maine. In 2009, 12.6% of people over 15 were divorced. This was the 5th highest percentage in the nation. As of 2008, the median age of Vermonters was 40.6 and that of the workforce was 43.7, compared with the national average of 41.1 years. Vermont leads U.S. states with the highest rates of LGBT identification, at 5.3%. Its LGBT population density is second in the U.S. only to the District of Columbia. Following national trends for opioid use, which has roughly tripled, addicts seeking treatment in Vermont have increased from 650 in 2011 to 7,500 in 2016. Vermont speech patterns. Linguists have identified speech patterns found among Vermonters as belonging to Western New England English, a dialect of New England English, which features a full pronunciation of all R sounds, pronouncing horse and horse the same, and pronouncing vowels in father and bother the same, none of which are features traditionally shared in neighboring Eastern New England English. Some rural speakers realize the T as a glottal stop. Mitten sounds like mean and Vermont like Vermon. A dwindling segment of the Vermont population, generally both rural and male especially in northwestern Vermont, pronounces certain vowels in a distinctive manner, e.g. cow sounds like cows, fight like foit, calf like cough, there like tear, hand like hay and back like bouquet. Eastern New England English, also found in New Hampshire, Maine, and eastern Massachusetts, was common in eastern Vermont in the mid-20th century and before, but has become rare. There the practice of dropping the R sound in words ending in R, farmer sounds like pharma, and adding an R sound to words ending in a vowel, idea sounds like ide, was common. Those characteristics in eastern Vermont appear to have been inherited from West Country and Scots-Irish ancestors. Religion. Economy. In 2015, Vermont was ranked by Forbes magazine as the 42nd best state in which to do business. It was 32nd in 2007, and 30th in 2006. In 2008, an economist said that the state had a really stagnant economy, which is what we are forecasting for Vermont for the next 30 years. In May 2010, Vermont's 6.2% unemployment rate was the fourth lowest in the nation. This rate reflects the second sharpest decline among the 50 states since the prior May. According to the 2010 U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis report, Vermont's gross state product, GSP, was $26 billion. Not accounting for size, this places the state 50th among the 50 states. It stood 34th in per capita GSP. Components of GSP were: government $3 billion, 13.4%. Real estate, rental, and leasing $2.6 billion, 11.6%. Durable goods manufacturing $2.2 billion, 9.6%. Healthcare and social assistance $2.1 billion, 9.4%. Retail trade $1.9 billion, 8.4%. Finance and insurance $1.3 billion, 5.9%. Construction $1.2 billion, 5.5%. Professional and technical services $1.2 billion, 5.5%. Wholesale trade $1.1 billion, 5.1%. Accommodations and food services $1 billion, 4.5%. Information $958 million, 4.2%. Non-durable goods manufacturing $711 million, 3.1%. Other services $563 million, 2.4%. Utilities $553 million, 2.4%. Educational services $478 million, 2.1%. Transportation and warehousing $484 million, 2.1%. Administrative and waste services $436 million, 1.9%. Agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting $375 million, 1.6%. Arts, entertainment, and recreation $194 million, 0.8%. Mining $100 million, 0.4%. Management of companies $35 million, 0.2%. Canada was Vermont's largest foreign trade partner in 2007. The state's second largest foreign trade partner was Taiwan. The state had $4 billion worth of commerce with Quebec. One measure of economic activity is retail sales. The state had $5.2 billion in 2007. In 2008, 8,631 new businesses were registered in Vermont, a decline of 500 from 2007. Personal income. The median household income from 2002 to 2004 was $45,692. This was 15th nationally. The median wage in the state in 2008 was $15.31 hourly or $31,845 annually. In 2007 about 80% owe. There is ferry service to New York State from Burlington, Charlotte, Grand Isle, and Shoreham. All but the Shoreham ferry are operated by the LCTC, Lake Champlain Transportation Company. Airports. Vermont is served by two commercial airports. Burlington International Airport is the largest in the state, with regular flights to Atlanta, Charlotte, Chicago, Detroit, Washington Dulles, JFK, LaGuardia, Newark, Orlando, Philadelphia, and Reagan National, as well as winter seasonal flights to Toronto. Rutland Southern Vermont Regional Airport has regular flights to Boston via Cape Air. Media. Newspapers of record. Vermont statute requires the Vermont Secretary of State to designate newspapers that provide general coverage across the state as the newspapers of record. On June 30, 2010, the Secretary of State designated the following newspapers for publishing administrative rule notices during the period of July 1, 2010 through June 30, 2011. Addison Independent, Bennington Banner, Brattleboro Reformer, Burlington Free Press, Caledonian Record, The Chronicle, Islander, Milton Independent, Newport Daily Express, News and Citizen / The Transcript, Rutland Herald, St Albans Messenger, Times Argus, Valley News, Vermont Lawyer, White River Valley Herald, aka Herald of Randolph. Broadcast media. Vermont hosts 93 radio broadcast stations. The top categories are talk/information, 11, country, 9, and classic rock, 9. The top owner of radio broadcast stations is Vermont Public Radio, 11 broadcast frequencies and 13 low-power, local transmitters. Other companies had 5 or fewer stations. The state has 15 online radio stations. Vermont hosts 10 high-power television broadcast stations, 3 of which are satellites of a primary station. Represented are the following networks and number of high-power transmitters: ABC, 1, CBS, 1, Fox, 1, NBC, 2, PBS, 4, and RTV, 1. In addition, it has 17 low-power television broadcast stations, which in several cases are satellites of the high-power stations. Utilities. Electricity. 2008 peak demand in the state was 1,100 megawatts, MW. In May 2009 Vermont created the first statewide renewable energy feed-in law. In 2010 there were about 150 methane digesters in the nation. Vermont led the nation with 6 online. While Vermont paid the lowest rates in New England for power in 2007, it is still ranked among the highest 11 states in the nation, that is, about 16% higher than the national average. In 2009 the state paid the highest rates for energy, including heating, in the U.S. and had the worst affordability gap nationwide. In 2009 the state received 1/3, 400 MW, of its power from Hydro-Quebec and 1/3 from Vermont Yankee. In total, the state got half its power from Canada and other states. It received 75% of the power it generated in the state from Vermont Yankee. The state is part of the Northeast Power Coordinating Council for the distribution of electricity. The state's largest electric utility, Green Mountain Power Corporation, serves 80% of Vermont households. The state has 78 hydropower dams. They generate 143 MW, about 12% of the state's total requirement. Vermont experts estimate that the state has the capacity to ultimately generate from 134 to 175 megawatts of electricity from hydropower. In 2006, the total summer generating capacity of Vermont was 1,117 megawatts. In 2005, the inhabitants of the state used an average of 5,883 kilowatt-hours, 21,180 mJ, of electricity per capita. Another source says that each household consumed 7,100 kilowatt-hours, 26,000 mJ, annually in 2008. Until the Vermont Yankee nuclear power plant was shut down in 2014, Vermont had the highest rate of nuclear-generated power in the nation, 73.7%. Vermont is one of 2 states with no coal-fired power plants. All Vermont utilities get their power from lines run by ISO New England. Each utility pays a share of transmitting power over these lines. Vermont's share is about 4.5%. Communication. A 2013 survey found that of 18,790 miles, 30,240 kilometers, of roads surveyed, all but 3,118 miles had cellular coverage by at least one carrier. The roads surveyed are concentrated in the more heavily populated areas. A June 2013 survey found that of nearly 249,976 addresses surveyed, 84.7% had fixed, as opposed to mobile, broadband available. It was projected that all but 29 addresses would have fixed broadband available by the end of 2013. Law and Government. Vermont is federally represented in the United States Congress by 2 senators and 1 representative. The state is governed by a constitution which divides governmental duties into legislative, executive, and judicial branches, the Vermont General Assembly, the Governor of Vermont and the Vermont Supreme Court. The governorship and the General Assembly serve 2-year terms including the governor and 30 senators. There are no term limits for any office. The state capital is in Montpelier. There are 3 types of incorporated municipalities in Vermont: towns, cities, and villages. Like most of New England, there is slight provision for autonomous county government. Counties and county seats are merely convenient repositories for various government services such as state courts, with several elected officers such as a state's attorney and sheriff. All county services are directly funded by the state of Vermont. The next effective governmental level below state government are municipalities. Most of these are towns. Finances and taxation. Vermont is the only state in the Union not to have a balanced budget requirement, yet Vermont has had a balanced budget every year since 1991. In 2007, Moody's gave its top bond credit rating, AAA, to the state. The state uses enterprise funds for operations that are similar to private business enterprises. The Vermont Lottery Commission, the Liquor Control Fund, and the Unemployment Compensation Trust Fund, are the largest of the state's enterprise funds. In 2007, Vermont was the 14th highest out of 50 states and the District of Columbia for state and local taxation, with a per capita load of $3,681. The national average was $3,447. However, CNN Money ranked Vermont highest in the nation based on the percentage of per capita income. The rankings showed Vermont had a per capita tax load of $5,387, 14.1% of the per capita income of $38,306. Vermont collects a state personal income tax in a progressive structure of 5 different income brackets, with marginal tax rates ranging from 3.6% to 9.5%. In 2008, the top 1% of Vermont residents provided 30% of the income tax revenue. Around 2,000 people had sufficient income to be taxed at the highest marginal rate of 9.5%. Vermont's general state sales tax rate is 6%, which is imposed on sales of tangible personal property, amusement charges, fabrication charges, some public utility charges and some service contracts. Some towns and cities impose an additional 1% local option tax. There are 46 exemptions from the sales tax, including exemptions for food, medical items, manufacturing machinery, equipment and fuel, residential fuel and electricity, clothing, and shoes. A use tax is imposed on the buyer at the same rate as the sales tax. The buyer pays the use tax when the seller fails to collect the sales tax or the items are purchased from a source where no tax is collected. The use tax applies to items taxable under the sales tax. Vermont does not collect inheritance taxes, but does impose a state estate tax. A Vermont estate tax return must be filed if the estate must file a federal estate tax return, the requirement for which depends on federal law. Vermont does not collect a state gift tax. Property taxes are levied by municipalities for the support of education and municipal services. Vermont does not assess tax on personal property. Property taxes are based on appraisal of the fair market value of real property. Rates vary from 0.97% on homesteaded property in Ferdinand, Essex County, to 2.72% on non-residence property in Bar City. Statewide, towns average 1.77% to 1.82% tax rate. In 2007, Vermont counties were among the highest in the country for property taxes. Chittenden, $3,809 median; Windham, $3,412; Addison, $3,352; and Windsor, $3,327, ranked in the top 100, out of 1,817 counties in the nation with populations greater than 20,000. 12 of the state's 14 counties stood in the top 20%. Median annual property taxes as a percentage of median homeowners' income, 5.4%, was rated as the third highest in the nation in 2011. To equitably support education, some towns are required by Act 60 to send some of their collected taxes to be redistributed to school districts lacking adequate support. Politics. Vermont is one of 4 states that were once independent nations, the others being Texas, California, and Hawaii. Notably, Vermont is the only state to have voted for a presidential candidate from the anti-Masonic Party, and Vermont was one of only 2 states to vote against Franklin D. Roosevelt in all 4 of his presidential campaigns, the other was Maine. Vermont's history of independent political thought has led to movements for the establishment of the Second Vermont Republic and other plans advocating secession. Vermont is the only state in the United States that requires voters to be sworn in, having established the voter's oath or affirmation in 1777. State politics. Republicans dominated local Vermont politics from the party's founding in 1854 until the mid-1970s. Before the 1960s, rural interests dominated the legislature. As a result, cities, particularly the older sections of Burlington and Winooski, were neglected and fell into decay. People began to move out to newer suburbs. Vermont was for many years a stronghold of the Republican Party. Ethnopolitical culture of the last century has seen a dramatic shift in voter turnout in the Green Mountain State. Since 1992, Vermont has voted for the Democrat in every presidential election. Before 1992, Vermont voted for the Republican in every single presidential election with the exception of 1964. A series of one-man, one-vote decisions made by the United States Supreme Court in the 1960s required states to redraw their legislative districts to accurately reflect population. As a result, urban areas in Vermont gained political power. The legislature was redistricted under one person, one vote. In the 1960s it passed the Land Use and Development Law, Act 250, in 1970 to discourage suburban sprawl and to limit major growth to already developed areas. The law, the first of its kind in the nation, created 9 district environmental commissions appointed by the governor, who judged land development and subdivision plans that would have a significant impact on the state's environment and many small communities. As a result of Act 250, Vermont was the last state to get a Walmart. There are now 6 Walmarts in the state, as of November 2017, but only 3 in Williston, St Albans, and Derby were newly built from the ground up. Because of the successful attempts to dilute what is perceived as the original intent of Act 250, and other development pressures, Vermont has been designated one of America's most endangered historic places by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. In 1995 the state banned the spreading of manure from December 15 to April 1, to prevent runoff and protect the water. Therefore farms must have environmentally approved facilities to store manure during this time frame. While the state voted largely Democratic, Republican Governor Douglas won all counties but Windham in the 2006 election. A controversy dating from 1999 has been over the adoption of civil unions, an institution which grants same-sex couples nearly all the rights and privileges of marriage at the state, but not federal, level. In Baker v. Vermont, 1999, the Vermont Supreme Court ruled that, under the Constitution of Vermont, the state must either allow same-sex marriage or provide a separate but equal status for them. The state legislature chose the second option by creating the institution of civil union. The bill was passed by the legislature and signed into law by Governor Howard Dean. In April 2009 the state legislature overrode Governor Jim Douglas's veto to allow same-sex marriage, becoming the first state in the nation to legalize same-sex marriage through legislation. In September 2009 Vermont became the 4th state in which same-sex couples could marry. In 2007 the state's House of Representatives rejected a measure which would have legalized assisted suicide for the terminally ill, by a vote of 82-63. Then with the governor's signature on May 20, 2013, Vermont became the 4th state to pass a Death with Dignity law, the first to be passed through legislation rather than by ballot initiative. Minor parties and independents flourish. Rules which eliminate smaller parties from the ballot in most states do not exist in Vermont. As a result, voters often have extensive choices for general elections. Among others, this more open policy enabled independents like Bernie Sanders to win election as mayor of Burlington, U.S. Congressman, and U.S. Senator. A political issue has been Act 60, which balances taxation for education funding. This has resulted in the town of Killington trying to secede from Vermont and join New Hampshire due to what the locals say is an unfair tax burden. The Vermont Constitution and the courts supports the right of a person to walk, fish and hunt, on any unposted, unfenced land. That is, trespass must be proven by the owner, it is not automatically assumed. The state is an alcoholic beverage control state. In 2007, through the Vermont Department of Liquor Control, it took in over $14 million from the sale and distribution of liquor. In 2013 Vermont became the 17th state to decriminalize marijuana. The statute makes possession of less than an ounce of the drug punishable by a small fine rather than arrest and possible jail time. In 2014 Vermont became the first state to call for a constitutional convention to overturn the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United v. FEC. In 2014, Vermont became the first state to mandate labeling of genetically modified organisms in the retail food supply. In January 2018, Governor Phil Scott opted to sign H.511, the Vermont Marijuana Legalization Bill, which allows adults 21 and older to possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana and grow up to 2 mature plants starting July 1, 2018. Federal politics. Historically, Vermont was considered one of the most reliably Republican states in the country in terms of national elections. From 1856 to 1988, Vermont voted Democratic only once, in Lyndon B. Johnson's landslide victory of 1964 against Barry M. Goldwater. It was also one of only 2 states, the other being Maine, where Franklin D. Roosevelt was completely shut out in all 4 of his presidential bids. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Republican presidential candidates frequently won the state with over 70% of the vote. In the 1980s and 1990s, many people moved in from out of state. Much of this immigration included the arrival of more liberal political influences of the urban areas of New York and the rest of New England in Vermont. The brand of republicanism in Vermont has historically been a moderate one, and combined with the newcomers from out of state, this made Vermont friendlier to Democrats as the national GOP moved to the right. As evidence of this, in 1990 Bernie Sanders, a self-described Democratic socialist, was elected to Vermont's lone seat in the House as an independent. Sanders became the state's junior senator in 2007. However, for his entire career in the House and Senate, Sanders has caucused with the Democrats and is counted as a Democrat for the purposes of committee assignments and voting for party leadership. After narrowly supporting George H.W. Bush in 1988, it gave Democrat Bill Clinton a 16-point margin in 1992, the first time the state had gone Democratic since 1964. Vermont has voted Democratic in every presidential election since. Since 2004, Vermont has been one of the Democrats' most loyal states. It gave John Kerry his 4th largest margin of victory in the presidential campaign against George W. Bush. He won the state's popular vote by 20 percentage points, taking almost 59% of the vote. Kerry, from neighboring Massachusetts, also became the first Northern Democrat ever to carry Vermont. Johnson was from Texas, Clinton from Arkansas, and Al Gore, triumphant in the Green Mountain State in 2000, from Tennessee. Essex County in the state's northeastern section was the only county to vote for Bush. Vermont is the only state that did not receive a visit from George W. Bush during his tenure as President of the United States. Indeed, George W. Bush and Donald Trump are the only Republicans to win the White House without carrying Vermont. In 2008, Vermont gave Barack Obama his 3rd largest margin of victory, 37 percentage points, and 3rd largest vote share in the nation by his winning the state 68% to 31%. Only Obama's birth state of Hawaii and Washington, D.C. were stronger Democratic victories. The same held true in 2012, when Obama carried Vermont 67% of the vote vs 31% for Romney, and in 2016, when Clinton won with 55.7% of the vote vs 29.8% for Trump. Vermont's 2 senators are Democrat Patrick Leahy, the longest-serving member of the Senate, and independent Bernie Sanders. The state is represented by an at-large member of the House, Democrat Peter Welch, who succeeded Sanders in 2007. Public health. In 2010, Vermont was the 6th highest-ranked state for well-being in a study by Gallup and Healthways. In 2010, the state stood 3rd in physical well-being of children. In 2010, Vermont was ranked the highest in the country for health outcomes. In 2000, the state implemented the Vermont Child Health Improvement Program to improve preventive services and management of chronic conditions. In 2011, the state ranked third in the nation in child health system performance. In 2011, the March of Dimes gave Vermont an A, ranking it number 1 in the country on its prematurity report card. In 2008, Vermont was ranked number 1 in the nation as the healthiest place to live for the 7th time in 8 years. Criteria included low teenage birth rate, strong health coverage, the lowest AIDS rate in the country, and 18 other factors. The state scored well in cessation of smoking, obesity, fewer occupational fatalities, prevalence of health insurance, and low infant mortality. A problem area was a high prevalence of binge drinking. While ranking 6th from best for adults in obesity in 2009, the state still had 22% obese with a rate of 27% for children 10-17. The ranking for children was 9th best in the nation. In 1993, the obesity rate for adults was 12%. Vermonters spend $141 million annually in medical costs related to obesity. The combined figures for overweight and obese adults rose from 40.7% in 1990 to 58.4% in 2010. This is better than most other states. In 2011, Vermont led the nation in the rate of young people who had consumed alcohol in the past month, 1/3 of people aged 11 through 20. 1/5 of that group had binged during that time. The state was second for the use of marijuana by young people, 30% of adults 18 to 25 in the past month. In 2009, Vermont was ranked second in the nation for safety. Crime statistics on violence were used for the criteria. Vermont has some of the least restrictive gun control laws in the country. A permit or license is not required for purchasing or carrying firearms. Concealed carry and open carry of a firearm is legal over the age of 16, with those below 16 requiring parental permission. In 2007, Vermont was ranked among the best 5 states in the country for preventing premature death in people under 75 years of age. The rate of survival was twice that of the 5 lowest performing states. In 2007, Vermont was ranked the 3rd safest state for highway fatalities. In 2007, 1/3 of fatal crashes involved a drunken driver. In 2008, Vermont was the 5th best state for fewest uninsured motorists, 6%. Parts of the state have been declared federal disaster areas on 28 occasions from 1963 to 2008. In 2007, the Environmental Protection Agency cited Chittenden and Bennington as counties with 70 parts per billion of smog, which is undesirable. In northern Vermont particularly, moose are not uncommon, including in urban areas. They constitute a traffic threat since they are unaware of vehicles. There are several deaths each year from automobiles striking moose. In 2008, about 100,000 Vermonters got their health care through the federal government, Medicare, TRICARE, and the Veterans Administration. An additional 10,000 work for employers who provide insurance under federal law under ERISA. About 20% of Vermonters receive health care outside of Vermont. 20% of the care provided within the state is to non-Vermonters. In 2008, the state had an estimated 7.6% with no medical insurance, down from 9.8% in 2005. In 2008, the Vermont Health Access Program for low-income, uninsured adults cost from $7 to $49 per month. A Catamount Health Premium Assistance Program was available for Vermonters who do not qualify for other programs. Total monthly premiums ranged from $60 to $393 for an individual. There was a $250 deductible. Insured paid $10 toward each generic prescription. 16.9% of residents 18 to 35 were uninsured, the highest group. Healthcare spending increased from $2.3 billion in 2000 to $4.8 billion in 2009. In 2009, adult daycare services cost more in Vermont than any other state, $150 daily. The state started airdrops of rabies bait for raccoons in 1997. Known rabies cases in raccoons peaked in 2007 at 165. The program is in cooperation with neighboring states and Canada. Education. Vermont was named the nation's smartest state in 2005 and 2006. In 2006 there was a gap between state testing standards and national, which is biased in favor of the state standards by 30%, on average. This puts Vermont 11th best in the nation. Most states have a higher bias. However, when allowance for race is considered, a 2007 U.S. government list of test scores shows Vermont white 4th graders performed 25th in the nation for reading, 229, 26th for math, 247. White 8th graders scored 18th for math, 292, and 12th for reading, 273. The first three scores were not considered statistically different from average. White 8th graders scored significantly above average in reading. Statistics for black students were not reliable because of their small representation in the testing. In 2017, spending $1.6 billion on education for 76,000 public school children, represents more than $21,000 per student. Education Week ranked the state second in high school graduation rates for 2007. In 2011, 91% of the population had graduated from high school compared with 85% nationally. Almost 34% have at least an undergraduate degree compared with 28% nationally. In 2013 the ratio of pupils to teachers was the lowest in the country. Higher education. Experimentation at the University of Vermont by George Perkins Marsh, and later the influence of Vermont-born philosopher and educator John Dewey brought about the concepts of electives and learning by doing. Vermont has 5 colleges within the Vermont State Colleges system, University of Vermont, UVM, and 14 other private, degree-granting colleges, including Bennington College, Burlington College, Champlain College, Goddard College, Marlborough College, Middlebury College, St. Michael's College, the Vermont Law School, and Norwich University. In 2016, the University of Vermont charged the second highest tuition in the nation for 4 years, $61,000 for in-state students, to $147,000 for out-of-state students. This compares with an average of $34,800 nationally for in-state students. Culture. Vermont festivals include the Vermont Maple Festival, Festival on the Green, the Vermont Dairy Festival in Enospag Falls, the Apple Festival, held each Columbus Day weekend, the Marlborough Music Festival, and the Vermont Brewers Festival. The Vermont Symphony Orchestra is supported by the state and performs throughout the area. Since 1973 the Sage City Symphony, formed by composer Louis Calabro, has performed in the Bennington area. In 1988 a number of Vermont-based composers including Gwyneth Walker formed the Vermont Composers Consortium, which was recognized by the governor proclaiming 2011 as the Year of the Composer. Burlington, Vermont's largest city, hosts the annual Vermont International Film Festival in October, that presents 10 days of independent film from the U.S. and around the world. The Brattleboro-based Vermont Theatre Company presents an annual Summer Shakespeare Festival. Brattleboro also hosts the summertime strolling of the Heifers Parade, which celebrates Vermont's dairy culture. The annual Green Mountain Film Festival is held in Montpelier. In the Northeast Kingdom, the Bread and Puppet Theatre holds weekly shows in Glover in a natural outdoor amphitheatre. Vermont's most recent best-known musical talent was the group Fish, whose members met while attending school in Vermont and spent much of their early years playing at venues across the state. The Vermont-based House of LeMay performs several shows a year, hosts the annual Winter is a Drag Ball, and performs for fundraisers. Examples of folk art found in Vermont include the Vermontosaurus in Post Mills, a community in Thetford. The rate of volunteerism in Vermont was 8th in the nation with 37% in 2007. The state stood first in New England. In 2011, Vermont residents were ranked as the healthiest in the country. Also in 2011, Vermont was ranked as the fourth most peaceful state in the United States. In 2011, Vermont residents were ranked as the sixth most fit/leanest in the country. Vermonters were the second most active citizens of state with 55.9% meeting the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's physical activity requirements. Vermont was ranked as the 12th happiest state in the country. There are a number of museums in the state. Sports. Winter sports. Winter sports are popular in New England, and Vermont's winter sports attractions are a big part of Vermont tourism. Some well-known attractions include Burke Mountain Ski Area, Jay Peak Resort, Killington Ski Resort, the Quechee Club Ski Area, and Smuggler's Notch Resort. Vermont natives in the snowboarding profession include Kevin Pierce, Ross Powers, Hannah Tedder, and Kelly Clark. Others learned snowboarding in the state, such as Louis Vito and Ellery Hollingsworth. Vermont Olympic gold medalists include Barbara Cochran, Hannah Carney, Kelly Clark, Ross Powers, and Hannah Tedder. Baseball. The largest professional franchise is the Vermont Lake Monsters, a single-A minor league baseball affiliate of the Oakland Athletics, based in Burlington. They were named the Vermont Expos before 2006. Up until the 2011 season, they were the affiliate of the Washington Nationals, formerly the Montreal Expos. Basketball. Currently the highest teams in basketball, representing Vermont, are the NCAA's Vermont Catamounts male and female. The Vermont Frost Heaves, the 2007 and 2008 American Basketball Association national champions, were a franchise of the Premier Basketball League, and were based in Barre and Burlington from the fall of 2006 through the winter of 2011. Football. The Vermont Bucks, an indoor football team, is based in Burlington and began play in 2017 as the founding team in the Can-Am Indoor Football League. For 2018, it joined the American Arena League. Soccer. The Vermont Voltage is a USL Premier Development League soccer club that plays in St Albans. Annually since 2002, high school statewide All-Stars compete against New Hampshire in 10 sports during Twin State playoffs. Motorsport. Vermont also has a few auto racing venues. The most popular of them is Thunder Road International Speed Bowl in Barre, Vermont. It is well known for its tight racing and has become well known in short-track stock car racing. Other racing circuits include the USAC-sanctioned Bear Ridge Speedway, and the NASCAR-sanctioned Devil's Bowl Speedway. Some NASCAR Cup drivers have come to Vermont circuits to compete against local weekly drivers such as Tony Stewart, Clint Bowyer, Kevin Harvick, Kenny Wallace, and Joe Nemechek. Kevin Lepage from Shelburne, Vermont is one of a few professional drivers from Vermont. Racing series in Vermont include NASCAR Wellen All-American Series, American Canadian Tour, and Vermont's own Tiger Sportsman Series. State symbols. State symbols include State Song These Green Mountains. Unofficial popular state song Moonlight in Vermont. State beverage milk. State pie apple pie. State fruit apple. State flower red clover. State mammal Morgan horse. State rock granite, marble, and slate. State tree sugar maple. State butterfly monarch butterfly. State fish cold water brook trout. State fish warm water walleye pike. State fossil white whale, beluga whale. State bird hermit thrush. Notable Vermonters. Vermont is the birthplace of former U.S. Presidents Chester A. Arthur and Calvin Coolidge. Residents. The following were either born in Vermont or resided there for a substantial period during their lives. Pearl S. Buck, author. Evans Carlson, United States Marine Corps General Officer and leader of Carlson.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.